Dr. West, this is my last question before I invite my sister Thuraya Zaidan to speak with you. Now that we do have voices that are coming up, like MC Abdul, Rashid Khalidi, of course, who's the Edward Said Chair at Columbia, we also know that facts do not speak for themselves. We have these voices, but facts don't speak for themselves. They require a critically conscious people to make meaning of them, to elevate these facts. And this kind of consciousness must imagine a beginning and end. In the case of Palestine, a homeland for their exile in 1948 in the Nakba. So my last question for you, Dr. Cornell, how can teachers take the concepts of Paideia, Parrhesia, and apply it to Palestine in their classrooms and with their students?
Well, one is that every teacher, I think, ought to have a profound care and concern for the quest for truth and how their students can be equipped to engage in the fallible quest for truth. Condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. Are you going to only be concerned about Jewish suffering and not concerned about Palestinian suffering in the stories that you tell? That's like saying I'm primarily concerned about white suffering and don't want to say a mumbling word about black suffering. How you going to understand the truth of America if you only talk about white suffering? Have white brothers and sisters suffered? Of course they've suffered. Can you tell the story of America just talking about white suffering? No. The foundations in terms of slavery and Jim Crow, the culture and so forth. Same is true in terms of Palestinian suffering vis-a-vis Jewish suffering. To fall in love with Palestinians does not mean you unlove Jewish brothers and sisters. It means that their suffering has the same value as Jewish suffering. And then when you look at the system and the structures, you see asymmetric relations of power. You see somebody on top terrorizing and traumatizing and generating cultures of hatred and demonizing, and you see somebody on the bottom. And so that's what teachers ought to be about, truth. This is not a question of trying to be sensitive to our new Middle Eastern immigrants because we believe in diversity and equity and all this other stuff. Please get off the crack pipe. We talking about Paideia. We talking about Parrhesia. Do we have the courage to engage in a painful quest for truth, but in a self-critical mode, which is to say, of course, that all of us can have our shortcomings. All of us can have our blind spots. And the good news is, brother, as you know, is that there's a whole new wave of our young Jewish brothers and sisters who are rejecting the lies that their parents and grandparents told them. From if not now, we can go across the board. They're wakening up. Oh, it was a land with no people. Oh, we heard that with the cowboys in America. Yes, there were people on that land. They got pushed out at gunpoint. Oh, we didn't hear that at the Jewish camp over the summer. No, you didn't. They lied to you, brother. Joshua, they lied to you, man. Are you concerned about the truth? Yes, I am, Brother West. Then read Rashi. Get a sense of what the realities are. But you're right. Facts themselves never speak for themselves. The framework's important. And in the end, you have to have people on the move. You have to have people who are willing to fight, willing to raise their voices, organize, mobilize, and so forth, and coming up with various strategies and tactics. That's why I spend as much time as I do with the BDS movement. And people say, oh, Brother West, this is such a controversial thing, and the courts and the Congress and others say that somehow it's got to be anti-Semitic. No, we're doing the same thing we did in South Africa. They told us the same thing in the 80s. A nonviolent form of acknowledging the plight and predicament of oppressed peoples that allows for people to boycott, to have sanctions, and to engage in various kinds of divestment movements.
And Dr. West, you know, in the 80s, during the anti-apartheid movement in the US,
yes,
the critics of South Africa never mentioned their biggest ally, State of Israel. During the anti-nuclear movement, no one ever mentioned nuclear heads of Israel. And so in many ways, we're now in this kind of anti-racist era. And I think the jury is still out if Israel is going to be included in that or not. And I think this is what the movement that we're trying to build. And I think that Paideia, Parrhesia are the values that we need to take with us, because the state of California erased Palestinians out of the ethnic studies curriculum. You know, the critical race theory is being rooted out of many districts across the country. And so this is a continuous struggle for freedom, for truth,